What's up, friends, and welcome into Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Chris Welsh. That is Pat Fitzmaurice. And we're here for Week 16 wide receiver ranks. We're going to be going through the top 36. It's not enough, but we got you covered. We're going to be hitting your starters if you're in a 3 wide receiver or 2 wide receiver with 1 flex. But at the end of the show, we'll tell you where you can get more and where we can answer more of your big questions. But we're going to be going through the big wide receiver matchups for the week in Week 16. It all comes down to this. It's the big intense range where some teams have gone away. The most important are still there, and you're clinging to a prayer. You're like, please do not have Cooper Kupp, Jaden Reed, Darnell Mooney. Can we stop having donuts throughout the week? I know it's recency. I completely acknowledge this, Pat. So I'm going to ask the question, knowing we're probably not going to have a true understanding of it. But like, do you remember so many absolute donuts happening from like elite-ish wide receivers, top 24 wide receivers in the playoffs in Week 15 and 16 so far? It's been a disaster. Or into the playoffs of like, I'm talking actual donuts. Like Deebo Samuel stinks, but like Jaden Reed, Cooper Kupp, Darnell Mooney, just donut. It's donut after donut right now.
Yeah, that was really rough last week with Cooper Kupp and Mooney, especially. You figure those guys as like they're sort of PPR receivers. That's what the appeal is in a lot of ways. That safe floor, because you figure they're going to get 4 or 5 catches every week without fail. When those guys put up a 0, yeah, that stings. And I know there are a lot of people holding those guys who didn't survive it last week.
Well, we are going to talk about the Falcons in just a tiny bit. They've made a quarterback change, and we're going to talk about what theoretical adjustment might be made to some of those wide receivers as Michael Penix is taking over. That was kind of our big breaking news for Week 16. Not going to be something we're going to be running to get Michael Penix in lineups unless maybe you're in some super flex, but it does obviously have an effect on the pass catchers, and we will have to speculate on that, as well as all the rest of these guys, top 36 going through. You guys want to check out what the ranks look like throughout the week because every day it's going to change. That's the cool thing about our ECR. As more rankers submit their ranks, the adjustments start to happen. So you can watch it adjust throughout the week. Go to fantasypros.com/rankings, and then you can follow along. Biggest matchups, biggest questions you have, put a little pin in it, and you can see all the great stuff that we got going on, from the matchup rating to the start and sit, projected points. Do they score plus or minus against their projected points? Those are all some cool stuff that's just on the sheet that you guys can check out, or on the page when you're checking out all of those. So fantasypros.com/rankings. Let's jump into it. Wide receiver ones, top 12. Jamar Chase, of course, at the tippy top, a wide receiver 1. Puka Nacua comes in at 2, Justin Jefferson, Nico Collins, and CeeDee Lamb. That's your top 5. Mike Evans, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Devontae Adams, T. Higgins, Tyreek Hill, and Brian Thomas at top 12. And Brian Thomas is where we just kind of hit the brakes here and talk about. I'm very high on Brian Thomas this week. I've got him a little bit inside, so I've got him at 10. He came in at 12, which surprised me a tiny bit. You've got him at 15 so far this week. Quarterback play, of course, stinks. But Brian Thomas in general has kind of been immune the last few weeks. Or really, the better way to say it is like all those worries we had of like, oh my gosh, what is Mac Jones going to do to him? It's just kind of faded away as he has 3 straight weeks of double-digit targets, Pat. His catches have gone up every single one of those weeks from 4 to 8 to 4 to 10. Those are his targets. And he has 3 touchdowns over that time. Talk to me about Brian Thomas. You're not low by any means. You've got him at a top 15. Do you think any of us are being a little too high or optimistic on Brian Thomas going up against the Raiders?
No, I mean, I feel like this is the right ballpark for him. Welsh, Mac Jones, not a guy we're rushing into our lineups in semifinal matchups in Week 16. But to Mac Jones's credit, he has been able to keep the fantasy value of Brian Thomas Jr. afloat. And since Week 10, it's been pretty much entirely Mac Jones at quarterback for the Jaguars. And since Week 10, Brian Thomas Jr. is wide receiver 13.5 point PPR fantasy points per game at 14 points, which is really pretty solid. He's averaged 5.8 catches and 72.2 receiving yards in those 5 games with Jones, with three touchdown catches. His weekly fantasy finishes over that stretch: wide receiver 76, wide receiver 28, wide receiver 13, wide receiver 23, and wide receiver 4 last week. So yeah, I mean, I do think we're in the right ballpark in the low end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2. I guess I just can't bring myself to put him in wide receiver 1 range when his target delivery mechanism is Mac Jones. And like in theory, it's a good matchup against the Raiders, whose cornerbacks we are not afraid of at all. And yet the Raiders have allowed the 9th fewest fantasy points and 7th fewest receptions and 6th fewest receiving yards to wide receivers. So,
but
yes,
over the last month, the Raiders have given up the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers over the last month. So on the seasonal total does look in favor of the Raiders, but lately, as of recent, it has deteriorated, and they are in the top 10 of most fantasy points given up to wide receivers. They have given up, by the way, the most receiving touchdowns over the last month to wide receivers, tied with the Carolina Panthers and maybe surprised you, the Pittsburgh Steelers. So where it looks a little bit of a like, oh, maybe this is an advantage, like you said, but the cornerback's kind of disappearing. I think it's a great spot. 36 targets over the last 3 games. Mac has just committed to Brian Thomas, and the Raiders kind of fallen apart from the touchdown perspective. They've also given up the 5th most receiving yards to wide receivers over the last month. So the recency of the Raiders secondary kind of blown out of the water, though they have a season total on them. I guess that's kind of why I'm following momentum. You know, Brian Thomas is a touchdown magnet. He's also a big play magnet. We have guys like, you know, I like Keon Coleman. You get these big play wide receivers. They get 2 or 3 targets. But now give me maybe the most exciting big play guy and give him 10 targets a game. I can't go against it. I think the upside is there. But to your point, you start to like, you're picking at hairs of like, do you have him over Terry McLaurin? Do you have him over such and such? I think the most fascinating one out of this, and I'm curious at your take, we've talked about him a ton this year, is talking about Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is, I believe, 11 on consensus ranks here, and Brian Thomas is 12. I have Thomas over Tyreek Hill. Not that I think the Niners are stopping him or by any means, but you know, if you do take Waddle, if Waddle were to miss the game, more focus on Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill's been so inconsistent. We know the upside is like number 1, but I don't know if I feel better about Tyreek Hill in general over Brian Thomas with how inconsistent the wrist, disappearing act. Also, Tua's gameplay has been really bad. That was why I decided, yeah, Mac Jones is the quarterback, but Brian Thomas is getting 10 plus targets, and he's as big play of a wide receiver as Tyreek Hill is right now. And frankly, Tua's not playing much different than Mac Jones. So that's why I went with that. But that is like a splitting hair thing. Do you think there's a line between Thomas and Hill?
No, I think they're pretty close, Welsh. I've got Hill ranked 12th, and that's with the assumption Waddle is going to be out. The problem is that last week, Teron Armstead missed the game for the Dolphins, and I believe their starting right tackle was also out. So they were starting rookies at offensive tackle against the Houston Texans, one of the best pass rushes in the league, and it was pretty catastrophic.
We could all tell.
The Miami passing game. Yeah. So like if Hill doesn't have enough time for even with his speed for him to get 20 yards or 15 yards downfield before the pass rush is all over Tua, like that's a real problem. And by the way, Welsh, one more thing about Brian Thomas Jr. I mean, the twists and turns of fantasy season takes. If someone would have told you back before week 1 that come week 16, we would have 1 rookie wide receiver ranked inside the top 12, it wouldn't be Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors, and it would be Brian Thomas Jr. Oh, and by the way, Trevor Lawrence is hurt, and Brian Thomas Jr. is still ranked inside wide receiver 1 range. I don't think a lot of people would have believed you with that prediction.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, that's been one of the biggest discourses on social media has been about like how valuable Brian Thomas is, and every other person being like, if we were to redraft today, you know, like where would they go? Yeah, it is. I think the narrative is hilarious too. If all those scenarios, you're like, who's the one? And he doesn't have his quarterback. It's not Marvin. It's not Malik Neighbors. It's not Rome Odunze. It is Brian Thomas, and he's been consistent. And again, them just littering him with targets is what makes me feel good. But, you know, like I said, I acknowledge this like him versus Tyreek Hill is more of just like a rank type of debate. I think most people have the ability to start Brian Thomas in any league, based on, unless you just had some incredible wide receiver run where it's like you have Jamar Chase, Nico Collins, Tyreek Hill, and then you have Brian Thomas and you can't start a flex. Okay, maybe that's then the conversation. But Brian Thomas is someone that I think you want to get in your lineups, and you should get in your lineups, and the ranks also support that. I've got my BP hat on. You guys can get BP on your phone, your app, your computer right now, and you can start taking advantage of some of the amazing things we've got going on at Betting Pros. And you always can, by the way. You can download the app and you can get on it for free. You can see some great picks. You can track your own picks, which I think is one of the most invaluable tools in there. You can even just track yourself into betting. You don't have to actually make the bets. You can do some quick picks and see, how am I doing? And then you can jump into markets. But right now, if you use the promo code FPFree, you can unlock 1 month of premium access to to Betting Pros. And what does that mean? It means access to everything. It means to the tools. We've got the prop cheat sheet. We got the prop analyzers. We've got prize pick analyzers, same game parlay tools, and just great analysis of each individual player and team you can go into. How many times have they hit it? How have similar players played against? Go and check out the tools today. Premium access to Betting Pros, FP Free. That's code FP Free. Download the app. Use that. Get a month. You can even track the great Pat Fitzmaurice. You can follow me on there. You can, don't look at how I did last Sunday. Look how I did on Monday. I had one of those swings where it was like, hey, look, we've lost 7 units and now we're up 20 units. I had one of those big 2 swing days there. But you can go and you can do it yourself, or track and follow all the other Fantasy Pros people and Betting Pros people. Do it today. Download the Betting Pros app, iOS and Android. Promo code FPFree. Let's take a look. Wide receivers 13 through 24, starting with Cortland Sutton, Terry McLaurin, Drake London, that's your top 15, Malik Neighbors, Cooper Kupp, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Juwan Jennings, Garrett Wilson, Ladd McConkey, DJ Moore, Zay Flowers, and Jordan Addison. And a partridge under a pear tree. That's what it felt like. Cooper Kupp, ECR 16. I've got him a bit lower. I've got him at 19. Fitz, you got him at 14. So you have Cooper Kupp higher than Brian Thomas. Kupp with a massively disappointing week. It's probably in everybody's brains, going up against the Jets, who, the secondary doesn't quite live up to anything or any of it. Puka Nacua is clearly the number one there. I guess the big question is like, can we avoid Cooper Kupp fading away in this offense? This means very little, but want to point out, I believe Tyler Higbee is also back in that and he gets a few targets in there. But I've kind of lost some of the Cooper Kupp is an absolute no-brainer, must start under every scenario feel to it by my low rank. You seem a little bit more optimistic. Was that purely just a one-off craziness that we had last week in your mind?
I do think it was, Welsh. And I know that, man, as recently as a month ago, a lot of people would rank Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua basically back-to-back, or even rank Kupp a little higher. Now I think there's a clear separation there, and Puka is a no-brainer top 5 wide receiver every week, and Kupp is somewhere in wide receiver 2 range. And I know the donut last week for Kupp was alarming, and hopefully there are Cooper Kupp investors watching the show who are still alive, exactly, if they survived. But since coming back from his injury in late October, Kupp is averaging 5.6 catches and 63.8 yards per game with 5 touchdowns in 8 games. And that includes the donut last week. So like that's solid wide receiver 2 production. And this week he's up against the Jets, who are a little less tough against slot receivers than they are against perimeter receivers. So I think it's a decent enough matchup for him. I think under most circumstances, you're rolling out Kupp still, even though no doubt the 0 last week has got you a little nervous.
One thing that also benefits to the Cooper Kupp side, over the last month, the 5th most fantasy points given up are the New York Jets. So, secondary and whatever you want to do, you can absolutely pass against the Jets. And as long as Cooper Kupp just gets re-involved and has that target share, that's what gets you excited about it. Probably, I just don't know where the maybe Brian Thomas versus Cooper Kupp is like an actual start-sit question. I still think we're in this territory with, if you listen to the running back show, if you go back and listen to it, I think there's a pretty extensive gap of like, oh, these are the good starting running backs. And then it's like, oh, you're taking shots. I think what I'm getting at is most flex spots should be filled by wide receivers. So when we are talking even through the 24-36, I think these are all guys that you're finding ways to get in your lineup. So whether a little bit lower or someone's a little bit higher, Cooper Kupp is still a start regardless of it, unless you have incredible, wide receivers. And sometimes you guys do in your 10-man leagues. One that could be a debate as well is Jaxon Smith-Njigba. He is wide receiver 18. You and I are on pretty far lengths of him. I've got him at 16. You've got him at 23. One of the things I will throw out to you, especially having like a hyper focus over the last month, obviously full PPR, he gets a little bit of a boost. The Minnesota Vikings have given up, hands down, the most receptions to running backs over the last month. It's not close. They have also given up the most receiving yards by a wide margin, almost 100 yards more than the next team. Yards, receptions, Minnesota Vikings. That's why I really like Jaxon Smith-Njigba as the top guy and the massive target share. You don't seem as optimistic where he is just fringely holding on to that wide receiver 2 spot.
Well, so Seahawks head coach Mike McDonald says Geno Smith should be able to practice and play this week. And that is a good thing, because if it were not Geno Smith at quarterback and it were Sam Howell, I would be ranking JSN at least 10 spots lower than this. Welsh, our mutual friend Scott Bogman and I spent a lot of time in the offseason arguing about whether Sam Howell had starter potential in the NFL, and I was on the no side of that. Let's just say Bogman has conceded to me this week that I was right after what we saw from Sam Howell in late game action against the Packers on Sunday night. So, yeah, I don't hate the matchup. It's a pretty favorable one, as you have pointed out. And our own Derek Brown pointed out in last week's primer that the Vikings had allowed the second most receptions to slot receivers since week 9. And then Keenan Allen went out last week and had 6 catches for 82 yards and a touchdown against them. So maybe the floor is pretty sturdy for Jaxon Smith-Njigba if, in fact, Geno does play. But Geno is clearly not going to be 100% on that knee. And really, Seattle's passing attack has been on sort of a downward trajectory of late. Over his last 5 games, Geno has 3 touchdown passes, and he's averaged 212.6 passing yards a game over that span. So there's just not a lot coming from here. And even though JSN has sort of surpassed DK Metcalf as the lead receiver in Seattle, I'm still just not feeling great about this Seahawks passing game, especially with Geno kind of banged up.
I can understand that. I will say 2 of those 3 touchdown passes were to Jaxon Smith-Njigba. So he has those receptions. I'd also say, for me personally, Geno Smith out is dramatically more of an effect on DK Metcalf to me than it is JSN, because if Howell is in, you're probably not going to have a lot of deep passes and not most likely a lot of check 1, check 2, check 3 type of drives. You're going to have quick throws. And where are quick throws going to go? Slot, JSN. So I think it has, maybe the upside of him being like wide receiver 16. If Sam Howell's in there, doesn't definitely feel as good. But, Minnesota has just given up absurd amounts to wide receivers. And Jaxon Smith-Njigba is coming off of a 12 target game, 10 reception game. He's got 10 receptions in 2 of his last 5 games. And he has had under 70 yards 0 times in the last 6 games. He has gone over that number. If you count in, 6 games, only one of those has he gone under the 70-yard marker. So regardless of the passing game kind of dipping down, Jaxon Smith-Njigba kind of keeps holding that floor. But it doesn't feel good if Sam Howell's the quarterback. So I totally acknowledge that. That's not going to make anybody feel good. Zay Flowers will be the last one we talk about in here. He is number 24 on the ECR. I've got him a little bit lower. You've got him a little bit higher. So let's call the whole thing off. What do you think about Zay Flowers going up against Pittsburgh? You seem a tiny bit more optimistic. We have some fade opportunities. I will say this goes against a narrative of mine. I am pro Lamar Jackson, very pro Lamar Jackson this week. And that might seem weird to people, but it is Steelers, the evil Steelers against Lamar Jackson. You would think Zay Flowers is going to probably play a role in that. But if I kind of tend to think that might be the one thing that they completely shut down. This might have to be another one of those Bateman picks up the slack type of things. But you tell me, you talk to me about Zay Flowers.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Zay is in a drought. From week 5 to week 9, Welsh, Zay Flowers topped the 100-yard mark in 4 of 5 games and was wide receiver 3 in PPR scoring over that stretch. In the 5 games since, Flowers has scored 1 touchdown, hasn't produced more than 74 receiving yards in any game, and is wide receiver 44 over that stretch. But to Zay's credit, he has at least hit double digits in PPR fantasy points in 4 straight games. So the floor has been okay. But basically, Welsh, I'm just sort of sticking with my assessment that Zay Flowers is a mid-range wide receiver 2. Like I've kind of felt all year that's what he was, and I've always kind of had him around there in my weekly rankings. I think the Ravens are going to need him to be more involved this week against the Steelers. When he faced Pittsburgh a few weeks ago, only 2 catches, but he did have 39 yards and a touchdown. I just don't think the Ravens are going to be able to go run heavy all game and lean on the run against the Steelers. I think they're going to have to mix it up a little bit. And I don't think Zay Flowers is going to get the shadow treatment from Joey Porter Jr. I just think they move him around a little too much for Porter to follow him and line Zay up in the slot at times. And I don't think Porter will follow him into the slot. So, yeah, I mean, I basically think Zay Flowers should be started this week unless you're absolutely stacked at receiver.
I think like the sentiment I kind of agree with, but like something that comes face to face with our ranks is like you have Zay Flowers quite a few spots ahead of Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I'll take JSN over him, as Bogman would say, with a bullet. Like, so that would be like our little battle this week where I clearly would want JSN, even with Sam Howell, if I'm being honest with you, over that Pittsburgh matchup. Oh, again, because I mean, my Sam Howell garbage, but I'm just saying like, I think it's to just be littered with targets. What else are they going to be able to do? I mean,
let me give you the JSN stat line if Sam Howell starts at quarterback. It's
all right.
8 catches for 43 yards.
So a Wandale. He's going to have the Wandale.
Yes, the Wandale, and no one wants the Wandale.
Full PPR, would you take JSN over Zay Flowers, or just in a vacuum, it's Zay Flowers over JSN regardless?
Yeah, in full PPR, I would if it's Geno. I would not if it were Sam Howell at quarterback.
Yeah, probably got a reference. These ranks are ranked off of half PPR, so JSN does lose a little bit of the value. But if Geno plays, JSN over Zay Flowers
in full PPR, yeah, that might flip it for me.
Still not half.
Not in half. No, and I'm ranking it based on the assumption that Geno is going to play for the Seahawks.
Oh, okay.
And I've still got Flowers ranked higher.
All right. Wide receiver 3s we're going to be talking to, or if you're in a 2 wide receiver, your flexes. But my friends, you have an opportunity to help shape the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. If you have enjoyed us all season long, we want to hear from you. Take our quick and easy survey at fantasypros.com/survey and share your feedback to help us improve. Here are some feedback suggestion tips. I love Welsh. Welsh is really great. What an awesome host Welsh is. You should have more of Welsh and Pat Fitzmaurice. Those are just some simple suggestions, but make it and put it into your own words. All it takes is just a minute or two. fantasypros.com/survey. Don't say like a ton of great things about Joe. We get it with Pisapia. Let's focus on the others. Like Erickson, he's so funny. I love Pat's smile. Welsh is great. Those are the type of suggestions. I'm not trying to dictate what you should do, but no, seriously. You can just go and help shape that podcast. We really appreciate the reviews and we take it to heart. fantasypros.com/survey if you would and be so kind. Wide receiver 25 through 36. Devontae Smith starts it up. Jerry Jeudy, Calvin Ridley, Jacoby Myers, Khalil Shakir, DK Metcalf. That's your top 30. Marvin Harrison Jr., Darnell Mooney, Jaden Reed, Adam Thielen, Jamison Williams, and Keenan Allen. All right, we are back to the Falcons, which I talked about at the top of the show. Darnell Mooney, ECR 32. Michael Penix is now your quarterback in Atlanta. What is your expectation of what he does or does not do for the pass catchers in Atlanta and this ECR for Darnell Mooney specifically?
Yeah, this move was overdue, Welsh. They should have done it 2 weeks ago, at least. Just an utterly unwatchable and terrible Monday night game between the Falcons and the Raiders. And the Falcons were clearly trying to hide Kirk Cousins in that game. Like, I don't know how many times the Falcons threw the ball on first down. I don't think it could have been more than like twice. Like they were absolutely trying to hide Kirk Cousins.
He Throw it to you. I just want to jump in.
Yeah.
I recall one pass where it was first read, and that was a Drake London touchdown. It was like, because Drake London ate that corner up so bad, he was open by a country mile, but everything else seemed to be like, I don't trust my first read. I don't trust my second read. He can't move. That was just some of the takes, like early season Aaron Rodgers. I was like, boy, he's stiff and he can't move. But then it kind of progressed and he got better. Kirk Cousins still can't move. And he also never feels comfortable with his first read. And by the time you get to the second check down, when you can't move, you got guys in your face, you got wide receivers and tight ends that don't have incredible separation. I definitely blame it on him. I think there's some other things out there. But yeah, he looked, and I think he's even acknowledged, it's kind of like a shell of who he was before, and clearly going to go down as a epically disastrous contract signing from this past year.
Yeah. And, Penix has the reputation of being an excellent pure passer, and it's well earned. He's got a stronger arm than Kirk Cousins. And like, he was known in college for his pinpoint accuracy. He put up just some huge, ridiculous circus numbers at the University of Washington his last couple of years there. And he helped you can make the case that he helped Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, and Jalen McMillan all get drafted probably higher than they should have been. Looking at the results from those three receivers in their rookie seasons. That said, I did not change the rankings of the Atlanta pass catchers this week, Welsh, after giving it great thought last night and this morning. So it's going to be the first start of Michael Penix Jr.'s NFL career, and maybe he smashes right out of the gate in this not too daunting matchup against the New York Giants. But more likely it's going to be a bumpy first start, as it is for most quarterbacks in their first NFL starts. So, kind of, you've got the washed up Kirk Cousins versus the completely newbie Michael Penix Jr. making his NFL debut. Which is going to be better for Atlanta receivers? I mean, I think Penix, but it could be a rough ride this week. So I fundamentally, I'm sort of doing a blanket fade of receivers. I think you're starting Drake London under most circumstances. I think you're probably not starting Darnell Mooney unless you're really hard pressed. And, if you're forced to start Ray McLeod, bless your soul. And, I hope you find the miracle you need to advance to week 17.
It's a Christmas miracle. I think my biggest question is does Kyle Pitts get more involved with Michael Penix? It's a tight end question, of course. I will say, if there's one thing you want to look at the skill set of Michael Penix to where that could work for any wide receiver, would be Darnell Mooney, because Darnell Mooney is, their best field stretcher, deep ball guy. Michael Penix can get the ball deeper, a lot better accuracy. That might equate to it, but it is more speculative. And Mooney just put up a big old fat donut, and they've got Bijan and everything like that. So I'm kind of with you on this one. I've got him even a little bit lower. I don't really trust Darnell Mooney. Keenan Allen, ECR 34. I'm right at consensus. You are higher. He's getting more targets. He gets the red zone share. Caleb Williams, still a problem. We are week 16 in. He still runs around the pocket for 12 minutes. He's indecisive. Great talent, and it'll get fixed over time. But his inconsistency has me uncomfortable at all times. He has ECR 36, but he has kind of been that big main target. And I'm guessing that's why you have him ranked a bit higher.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest positive, Welsh, I know it hasn't been pretty for Caleb for much of the season, and lately there have been some hiccups. But the one thing that has improved is his chemistry with Keenan Allen, which was not there early in the season. But over his last 4 games, Keenan Allen has 4 touchdowns. He's had 5 or more catches in 3 of his last 4 games. And the nice little run that Keenan Allen is on started with the Bears game against the Lions on Thanksgiving. You might recall, Welsh, that the Bears did not have a first down in that game until inside the 2-minute warning of the first half. But then Keenan Allen went bonkers in the second half and finished with 5 catches for 73 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I still love this matchup. The Lions have been fairly tough on outside receivers this year. I don't know if that'll still be the case with Carlton Davis hurt now, but they have been giving it up to inside slot receivers all year. Lions slot cornerback Amik Robertson is allowing 1.45 yards per route run into his coverage. And PFF grades Robertson 90th out of the 115 cornerbacks they have graded this season. I just think this is a terrific matchup for Keenan Allen. And, I'm hoping for something close to a repeat of his Thanksgiving Day performance.
Final wide receiver we will hit here is Mr. Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen, a lot of conversation this past week about who we're starting him over. We had debates of like Marvin Harrison versus Adam Thielen. It was a little bit underwhelming this past week. He only ended up having 5 catches. He did have 7 targets, but he does have 28 targets over his last 3 games. He's eclipsed 99 yards in 2 of the last 3, and he's going up against whichever way you want to look at it, it's like a median matchup against the Arizona Cardinals. It's not great. It's not awful. It's decently solid. They were favorites last week. There was kind of a disappointment spot there. Jalen Coker obviously had like the huge play, and he was the big like total wide receiver from a fantasy perspective. But Thielen is the mass target guy, and he's the guy that I think it is safe. It's like 7 to 8 target plus per game. He's ranking relatively low this week. Do you think the shine is off a little bit in like what he can do for you? Is he at best fringe, or do you think it's better to go for higher upside plays versus Adam Thielen, who maybe is just settling in as like a decent 5 to 6 catch, 60-yard guy? Do you want to play some bigger play options over him?
There is some recency bias baked into this ECR for Adam Thielen, Welsh. He gave us 17 catches for 201 yards combined in weeks 13 and 14. And then a step back last week with 5 catches for 51 yards. Not bad, but obviously not as fun as those week 13 and week 14 numbers. So maybe the recency bias is a little justified, though, because Jalen Coker back in the lineup might hurt Thielen a little bit, because Coker takes some of those slot snaps, and he's not exclusive. Now neither guy is exclusive in the slot. They sort of move those guys around a little bit. So Thielen might line up outside more often. With Coker back, probably not as good a thing for Thielen's fantasy outlook. But Xavier Leggett is out with a groin injury this week. So at least that means that Thielen and Coker are likely to account for a very large percentage of all of Bryce Young's targets this week. So, mid-range to back end wide receiver 3. I think he's probably going to be in a lot of start-sit questions for people this week, because I do think he's kind of an on-the-fence guy.
Let me just throw this at you real quick. A guy that I kind of like this week, there's not enough narrative behind it, but like Keon Coleman. And I think it's more speculative, like definitely flex play. You got a guy like Keon Coleman, who's a really big play option, great cornerback wide receiver matchup, according to PFF, getting a few more targets in there. And then also throw in like a guy like Christian Watson, kind of similar players. Christian Watson obviously can have really big plays. We're just looking for volume for him. Do you like, especially if you are reaching a tiny bit, do you see a scenario where you would start Christian Watson or Keon Coleman over a guy like Adam Thielen, thinking that maybe the upside is higher? And maybe Keon Coleman's a bad example of it. You might like him a lot less than Watson. So if you want to just stick to Watson, do you think Watson's upside outweighs the floor of what you could get from Thielen?
Yeah, I mean, I know you can always get the big play from Watson or Keon Coleman. I just worry that you could also get 2 or 3 targets for both of those guys the entire game. With what I mentioned earlier about Jordan Love averaging 23 pass attempts over like his last 5 games, and how run heavy the Packers have been, and how they're 2 touchdown favorites against the Saints and are probably going to be extra run heavy again in that likely to be favorable game script. So I think I'd go with Adam Thielen and the, pretty safe target floor of 6, 7 with the potential for 10, 11, 12.
Deebo Samuel, Keon Coleman, Romeo Doubs, Xavier Worthy, Michael Pittman. These might be questions for you this week, but we got you covered. If you do have those as questions and we didn't hit on the player that you were thinking about, you can join us on Thursday on our YouTube channel right here, youtube.com/fantasypros, 3 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. We got a start and sit live stream. We'll be answering your questions. You just pop in, drop your questions. We're going to be going through a litany of them, and maybe, just maybe, yours we can hit. So make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And that one specifically, you can set reminders on YouTube as well. Once we have dropped the core of the video, you can say, remind me, and that bad boy will give you a notification when we do actually go live. That is it for the wide receiver ranks for week 16. For Pat Fitzmaurice, I'm Chris Welsh. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. Good luck in your playoff matchups. We'll talk to you next time right here on Fantasy Pros.